Manchester Pusher, which should be really, really interesting. So apparently Manchester has its very own pet serial killer, and there's some strange doings afoot, to be sure. So I've got a couple of great articles, as usual, some funky tunes, and a couple of great quotes. So hang out with me for the next hour. You're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International. Jeff Beck, hi-ho, Silver Lining. Good old Jeff Beck, he's been around for 100 billion years. Now, my first article comes from Activist Post. We do like Activist Post. They're quite an edgy site, these guys. And the title of the article is City Had to Stop Arresting Actual Criminals because they filled up the jail with non-violent offenders. This is by Justin Gardner. In Greene County, Missouri, the epidemic of mass incarceration is coming back to bite authorities, well, on the arse, really, in one American city because the Greene County jail is completely full. The Springfield population, 165,000, is unable to arrest more than 12,000 people accused of crimes such as traffic infractions and misdemeanor assaults. Missouri's third largest city has lost almost $500,000 in less than a year from unpaid fines and fees. These lost extortion fees are likely the biggest concern of city officials. Springfield's citizens are taking advantage of the problem. One judge said that 82 people were supposed to appear in court under a docket of cases, but only 8 bothered to turn up. I think you'll find that this is being repeated all around the world as people just stop, cooperating with a parent-like system that treats us all like children. There's been no significant difference in crime rate beyond normal fluctuation, and the city acknowledges that it can't tell if the lack of arrests has any effect. The situation is causing quite the kerfuffle between Greene County Sheriff Jim Arnott and city officials. Last April, Arnott said he would not take any more municipal prisoners, even though the city says there was an agreement that the jail, which opened in 2001, would take them. However, Arnott is taking federal inmates despite the full capacity. The county gets paid $61 a day for each federal inmate, while the city does not pay anything to the county for housing the inmates. It seems that the nature of the American for-profit prison industrial complex is at the heart of this dispute. The sheriff is fine with taking prisoners when he makes a profit, but turns them away if there is no money involved. It's not really about right and wrong, but about feeding the profits of the jail system. The city of Springfield and Sheriff Arnott have filed lawsuits against each other. It's gotten so bad that Springfield Mayor Bob Stevens on Tuesday blamed the sheriff for an incident where a man with outstanding warrants hit a police officer and dragged him 150 yards. While it is entertaining to see law enforcement authorities casting fallacies at each other, the issue in Springfield is a symptom of the malady of mass incarceration. Law enforcement is hungry to lock up people for victimless crimes such as traffic violations. And where it's not obviously always the answer to do this, and offences, and also with offences under the so-called war on drugs. This demand for prisoners feeds a system where profits are reaped off the backs of mostly poor to middle-class citizens, extorting money at every turn, from going to jail to getting out on bail to being monitored on probation. It creates an incentive for cops to intrude on the lives of more and more people so they can justify an ever-expanding quest for more equipment and training to carry out more oppression. I don't think they'll be happy until everyone in the world is in jail. In fact, I've come to the conclusion this whole planet is a maximum security prison planet. Not just a prison planet, but a maximum security prison planet. One of the leading groups, even cops know ending the war on drugs will not only fix the prison overpopulation problem, but it would dramatically reduce crime. One of the leading groups of law enforcers working to end the drug war is called LEAP, or Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. LEAP lists some particularly startling facts on their website. There is a drug arrest every 19 seconds in the US. Of more than 1.6 million drug arrests in 2009, 82% were for possession alone. The US government estimates that more than 118 million Americans above the age of 12, 47% of the population, admit to using illegal drugs. 1 out of every 100 American adults is behind bars in jail or prison, and the US houses nearly 25% of the world's prisoners, despite having less than 5% of the world's total population. In 4 years, more than 35,000 people have been killed in violence related to Mexico's war against the cartels that control the illegal drug market, and the Department of Justice says that the illegal drug market in the US is dominated by 900,000 criminally active gang members affiliated with 20,000 street gangs in more than 2,500 cities, and that Mexico drug cartels now directly control illegal drug markets in at least 230 American cities. That's enormous. One of the co-founding members of LEAP is former police captain Peter Christ. Christ travels around the country blowing the lid off America's corrupt and immoral war. His argument is based on facts and grounded in reality. The war on drugs promotes violence, ruins lives, and costs taxpayers billions of dollars. So as you can see, this war on drugs, prohibition never works. Didn't they learn that from the was it the 1920s when they had the prohibition against alcohol? It obviously doesn't work, and it always winds up. It's like I mean, I'm not a fan of guns or anything along those lines, but it's like when you disarm people, all you do is drive all the illegal trade in weapons underground. So if you legalise essentially everything, you can keep track of it and educate people. Whereas if you push it down and illegalise it, then of course it's going to go to the black market. Bill Hicks, a famous comedian, wonderful American social critic and political observer, he said George Bush said that this is George Bush, the idiot's son, when he was in his presidency. George Bush said that we are losing the war on drugs. So you mean that there's a war on drugs and the people on drugs are winning, which is slightly hilarious. Now, in regards to this, large swathes of the ever-growing prison system are populated with right-brained people who cannot help but fall foul of a left-brain system. The fastest-growing demographic in the Australian prison systems is the sacred Indigenous woman, while almost 30% of the Indigenous population of Australia is in jail, and I would suggest it's much more than that. 84% of the prison population has been sexually abused as children, and 85% of the prison population has some kind of mental illness, whatever that is. While the fastest growing homeless demographic in America is returned female veterans. In America, the home of privatised prisons, 1 in 99 adults are in prison, and they operate a 3 strikes and you're out system, which essentially means that if you've been convicted of 2 crimes that are serious enough, the 3rd conviction will carry a life sentence of 25 years or more, no matter how trivial. As such, Leandra Andre is serving 2 consecutive 25-year terms for shoplifting 9 videotapes, and Kevin Webber is serving 26 years imprisonment for stealing 4 chocolate chip cookies. While it may seem astonishing, this is actually happening. 1 in 20 men aged 30 to 34 are behind bars. For black males, that's 1 in 9, and there are more 17-year-old black people in jail than in college. 5% of the world's population are American, and 25% of the global prison population is American, as they outlined in that article just there. And this is just some further information I'm adding. This is where basically it gets very interesting, as there is a business angle to this, which incentivises private prisons to keep a 90% full capacity for at least 20 years, or for the next 20 years, as per government contracts, and a quota system for the police to arrest and incarcerate people. This may help to explain the inordinate amount of police who've been caught red-handed planting drugs and evidence on innocent people, and why theft, sexual assault, drug use, corruption and murder has skyrocketed in American police forces and seems to go largely unpunished. While it is illegal to import anything into America that has been procured through forced labour, incredibly, America has effectively reinvented the slave trade by producing, under the duress of prison populations, 100% of all military helmets, ammunition belts, bulletproof vests, ID tags and other items, 93% of all domestically produced paints, 36% of home appliances and 21% of office furniture, which allows the US to compete with factories in Mexico due to the cost of labour. If the prisoners refuse to work, they are put in solitary confinement. This is slavery, no 2 ways about it. This then brings a very dark shadow over the increasing push for corporations to supersede governments through shady global trade deals like TTIP and the TPP, as well as CISPA, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, which basically gives the emerging GovCorp agencies carte blanche to monitor, identify and weed out those who oppose their disgusting power grab through the internet. And you're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International.
I'm never alone, I'm alone all the time. Are you at one, or do you lie? We live in a wheel where everyone steals. When we rise, it's like strawberry fields. I treated you bad, you bruised my face. Couldn't love you more, you've got a beautiful taste. Don't let the days go by. Could have been easier on you. I couldn't change, though I wanted to. Should have been easier on three. Our old friend Finn and you and me. Glycerine. Don't let the days go by. Glycerine. Don't let the days go just regress. Mine doesn't need clear, simple and plain. Well, that's just fine, that's just one of my names. Don't let the days go by. Could have been easier on you. Glycerine.
Bush Glycerine. Haven't heard that song in such a long time. You're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International, and it's, I think, what is the date today? It's the 25th of March, for God's sake. How did that happen? And it's the Easter long weekend, so there you go. Apparently Easter, by the way, is reckoned by the phases of the moon. So even though people like to think that we are very modern, actually every celebration that we have is very, very pagan. Now I want to... my next article, this is very, very interesting, this one. There is this one's on the pusher. So apparently Manchester has a serial killer. So this is only a short piece that I've done, and it's just a small little piece of investigation. I've only just done this in the last couple of days, so all of this information is freely available, and actually there's a lot more to add than this, but this is what I've come across, a little bit of information, also just in the mainstream, as well as information released by Greater Manchester Police. So basically in the last couple of days I've done this little bit of work, and over the course of the last few weeks I've attempted to get an expert or experts on the show to shed some light on what we could be dealing with regarding the so-called Manchester pusher. Allegedly Manchester's very own pet serial killer. This is certainly not an in-depth piece of research. It's quite cursory in my opinion. However, the information I've seen so far leaves a lot to be desired, so I wanted to give a snapshot of where this comes from, how it has evolved, and where it could be going. An urban legend has sprung up in Manchester City surrounding the mythical Pusher, or is it Pushers? Let's not forget Jack the Ripper, the Lone Nut, was a gang of no less than 3 men, as covered in one of my previous shows regarding Stephen Knight's book Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution. The ever-growing mythological icon of the Pusher was born in December 2014 when Greater Manchester Police, who are the 3rd largest force in England, responded to a Freedom of Information request by a journalist from the Daily Star with figures on how many people had died in the canals and waterways across Greater Manchester between 2008 and 2014. This data was later presented to the now infamous Professor Craig Jackson, Head of Department Psychology, School of Sciences at the University of Birmingham, who was encouraged to believe that this information was strictly for the city centre and not the county as a whole. He described the number of deaths as, quote, alarming, and that waterways were not popular suicide spots, especially for men, although waterways are popular dumping sites for bodies, as the water destroys evidence and can be a sure way to erase DNA. When Professor Craig Jackson shared his views, he was immediately lambasted, vilified and threatened by multiple sources. We are not just talking about some punter who rung up the local cop shop with wild allegations. We are talking about a man whose expertise covers investigative psychology, deviance and psychopathology in the workplace, geographical profiling and psychological assessments, and whose qualifications range from a chartered psychologist to a PhD in mental health. He hypothesized that there might be foul play involved in January 2015, and the story was published that a serial killer may be on the loose in Manchester. This turn of events could be attributed to media sensationalism, to grab headlines, as we know the media are prone to do, because frankly they're a bunch of snivelling parasites. However, about 400 people drown in the UK every year, and between August 2010 and August 2012, 1/3 of all these deaths in the UK occurred in the Greater Manchester region. Since 2008, 60+ bodies have been pulled from the Greater Manchester canals, while a further 20 were discovered in local rivers, bringing the number in excess of 80 victims to date. This is why you see contradictory reports in the media about the number of deaths. Some articles only focus on the canals, while some articles include the rivers as well. Professor Craig Jackson later retracted his comments, claiming his words had been blown out of context. Take that as you like. The man was effectively kicked in the balls for saying what he said, and highly professional people with reputations to protect have a lot to lose, and thus they don't like to rock the boat. So nicely played there, Professor. Nicely played. On the Greater Manchester Police YouTube channel, GM Police, they responded via Detective Superintendent Peter Marsh from the Major Incident Team, who claimed that all the deaths had been investigated, whether accidental or drug and alcohol related or an assault related offence. He specifically outlined that it is the purpose of their investigation to determine whether any criminal activity has occurred. He admitted that while some of the victims had been robbed, pushed or both, that there had been some arrests due to this occurring, and strongly advised that, quote, there is no evidence to indicate that a killer or canal pusher is responsible. The people who have fallen and climbed out or have been rescued have not reported anyone leading them to the water or following them and pushing them in. Now, that's on record, folks. Let's hope for their sake they are right. Otherwise, if authorities suspected foul play and didn't warn the public despite comments to the contrary made by a university specialist in this area, they would need to be held accountable for that, I would think. Detective Superintendent Peter Marsh also warned how distressing this information this speculation is to the families of the victims, and that the coroners would appreciate any information from the public to determine any evidence that someone had acted under criminal circumstances. And he reassured the public that the police have a very, very high detection rate for murders and manslaughters, and that the police do a lot of work in and around these deaths and investigations. For pushers who have shoved someone into the canals, he mentioned in particular one occasion someone had been interviewed for pushing and no charges were laid due to the circumstances, and he reiterated there is, quote, no evidence to support the story in the papers. Detective Superintendent Peter Marsh also headed up an investigation to prosecute child sex abuse by Indian Asian men who were routinely abusing young girls in the Rochdale cover-up, where the Greater Manchester Police were accused of having a, quote, lack of desire to prosecute child abusers, as well as, quote, shredding and destroying documents. Oh dear. While authorities claim these wild allegations are distressing to the families, some families themselves have hit back demanding answers from the police, claiming there are more questions than answers regarding these mysterious incidences. For example, Tony Scanlon, 48, was found dead in 6 inches of water in a fetal position in March 2007. He was fully clothed and found 10 metres from the canal crossing where he is alleged to have crossed. His son, a former veteran who saw action in Afghanistan and Iraq, wondered why there were no scrape marks on his body despite the shallow water apparently washing him 10 metres away from where it is claimed he fell in, and despite a small laceration on his head and a bruise, there were no other injuries mentioned. His sister, Sharon Smith, claimed she conducted her own house-to-house inquiry 2 days after he was found, and one resident claimed she had heard an altercation between a man and a woman around the time Tony Scanlon was supposed to be crossing the canal. When the resident was asked why she hadn't told the police this information, she said they hadn't knocked. So much for their so-called, quote, robust investigations. Police claim that Mr. Scanlon was heavily intoxicated after drinking 6 cans of beer, but his son claims 6 cans wouldn't have even touched the sides of old Tony, who was a former probation officer and mechanic. Separately, the parents of David Plunkett, now this is weird, rang their son to see if he was okay after leaving a nightclub in Trafford when he lost his friends. He was heard making, quote, howling noises and making ghastly screams. His parents called 999. For those internationals who are listening to this, that's the emergency triple number there. And he held his parents held the phone up so the police officer could hear the call on another phone. The emergency handler said the noises were, quote, chilling screams, but the call was not recorded as the equipment wasn't working at the emergency call centre. The officer who took the distressing call was so appalled by the apparent blunder, she later resigned. The anonymous police officer said, quote, the incident still haunts me to this day, and with every death I see reported in the news, I become more and more convinced that these are murders and not accidents. David Plunkett was found dead in the Manchester Ship Canal 3 weeks later. Inspector Phil Spurgeon of the Greater Manchester Police, in a short video on YouTube called Manchester 61 and Counting, said that although the number of bodies retrieved is quote-unquote high, he went on to say, is that number high compared to other areas? It's very difficult to say because you can't compare like with like. But isn't like and like comparable by definition, Inspector? Surely it's not hard to compare the number of bodies found in the Greater Manchester waterways since 2008 and compare that number with any other city that has canals or waterways based on the percentage of population, drinking precincts, age, sex. There are a lot of identifying factors that could well indicate if Manchester is not following common trends elsewhere. Why is this simple question so difficult to answer? Can we not get freedom of information requests from other cities with canals and just add up the numbers? There are 500 licensed premises in a 2 square mile radius in Manchester City, and Inspector Spurgeon is on record as saying that due to the high number of licensed premises, unfortunately you will have quote-unquote problems. The inspector also advised that when one is readying themselves for the evening, for example, when selecting what kind of clothes you'll be wearing, try to plan for how you're going to get home, which friends you are going to be with, and not to find yourself on your own with no money and unfamiliar with your surroundings. Try also to imagine floating in a shallow body of water to be discovered by dog walkers, and plan your evening around this event. Now seriously, we all make general plans, but those plans are often changed at the drop of a hat or an acid trip. For example, Manchester City Angels are a team of volunteers who go out onto the street at night looking for vulnerable people. They must have a very large team, as the number of vulnerable people right outside the door of these studios as I speak is frankly spectacular. While it is generally agreed inebriated people around waterways are a dangerous cocktail, no pun intended, it does not explain why so many young men, not women, under the age of 30 are drowning, and I use that term very loosely, in Manchester's waterways. Interestingly, in another YouTube video, a young man who calls himself Freddie Hotes, under the YouTube handle The Scribe, outlined an eerie story where he said he was walking along the canals around 2 a.m. or 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning about 15 years ago. He became aware how vulnerable and isolated the area he was, and he noticed a small canal boat slowly making its way toward him, captained by a guy he would describe as having a ghost-like complexion and had a very creepy air. He said that a body was found the next day or so along that stretch of water, and wondered if canal boats weren't being used to lure young men and hide the bodies on board and dispose of them several days or weeks later at the leisure of the perpetrators. He described the experience as, quote, fucking creeped the shit out of me. Thanks, Freddie, for that one. Thanks for your input. In a previous show, I covered off on a former police investigator, David Politis, and his Missing 411 series of books, in which he highlights that he stumbled upon anomalous disappearances from national parks and wildlife reserves across America and Canada. Untold numbers of people are mysteriously disappearing around the world, and while the media may report the initial disappearance, often we don't hear about the follow-up on whether the unfortunate person has been found or not. Sometimes small bones and a pile of clothes are discovered years later. Children are discovered miles from where they disappeared over mountain ranges through treacherous terrain in a short period of time, while searchers looking for missing people in areas where they didn't disappear. Why? David Politis has recently covered a series of urban disappearances in which he makes mention of the Manchester Canal victims and the strange circumstances of their deaths. For Chris Brani, 22, from Temperley, who was found dead in the Manchester Ship Canal 10 days after going missing from a Stone Roses concert in Heaton Park in June 2012, after he became separated from his friends. Again, another separation from the friends. Following the gig, sparking a massive manhunt across the region, and at an inquest into his death, Deputy Coroner Joanne Kearsley recorded an open verdict and admitted she simply couldn't say how he ended up in the water. In another death, Manchester University student Suvik Pal, 18, was found dead in the Bridgewater Canal 3 weeks after he had been ejected from a New Year's Eve party at the Warehouse Project dance night in Trafford Park. He had been seen walking away from the venue with a mystery man. Now, David Politis, being a former veteran police officer, knows a rat when he smells one, and there's heaps of rats here. Politis has outlined some of the cases in the US and Canada where young men specifically are turning up in waterways, sometimes days, weeks or months after they have disappeared, while autopsies claim they had only been dead for a few days or even hours. But where were they, if they were alive during the intervening time before they were found conveniently in waterways that is known to destroy DNA? More often than not, the coroner decides on an open verdict, which means they don't know how or why it happened, but are closing the case anyway. Interestingly enough, in an interview with author Thomas Sheridan, who has researched psychopathic behaviour in his books, said that due to the large modern apartment buildings along the canals, potential serial killers or a killer or killers may have a safe house or houses, i.e. the apartments along the waterways. This is all speculation, obviously, and don't we just love our dirty, dirty speculation? Thomas Sheridan outlined that disposing of bodies in waters is symbolic of washing away guilt, a sort of perceived emotional dirt, if you will. There was also speculation made that as some of the victims are young Muslim, Arabic or Indian, Asian, Hindu men, that the police may be employing so-called cultural sensitivity, in that if these young men are the victims of a homosexually motivated serial killer, exposing these young men's sexual preferences may bring shame and undue attention to their families due to traditional beliefs. How very sad has our society become if we cannot tackle the possibility of a serial homicidal maniac out of the fear of exposing a few harmless puffs. What have we become? This is in the same league as not tackling the overwhelming and increasing number of crimes against women in fear of being branded as being branded discriminatory against certain traditional or cultural practices that are technically against the law. Are we becoming so morbidly politically correct that we cannot even uphold the law for fear of bastardizing minorities? But shouldn't everyone want the law to be upheld to ensure that we enjoy safe communities? Are we becoming too soft by shirking our responsibilities out of ignorance and false piety? I'm not suggesting there is or isn't something untoward happening here, but when we routinely see VIP pedophile investigations being shut down or bungled in light of heinous crimes carried out by some members of the establishment who hide behind their political power, their clout and powerful connections in the parliament, the police force and other areas of society that are trusted to pursue justice against these people, and yet they don't. There are too many strange things happening domestically, socially, politically and globally for all of this to fall under the title of coincidence. After all, there is an old adage in espionage that says twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. Try hundreds of thousands of times and that will give you your answer. David Paulides also made reference to the possibility of GHB, gamma-hydroxybutyric acid, otherwise known as a date rape drug, as well as very low levels of alcohol or prescriptions that people haven't been prescribed being found in their bloodstream. As well as this, anomalies between the time difference the person went missing and when their bodies were found not matching with rigor mortis or decomposition for the same period. Are these men still alive when they are placed in the water? Are the police so baffled they would rather claim it isn't happening rather than admit they don't know what's going on? We have a tendency in our modern times to make shit up when we have no answer. Perhaps the urban myth of the pusher has sprung up because we can't face the fact that sometimes people simply die and sometimes they die under mysterious circumstances. It still doesn't answer the question why young men under 30 who are either gay or possibly mistaken for being gay are turning up in the waterways by the droves. That said, insurance companies set a higher premium for life insurance on young men because they are more prone to take risks, especially when they are drunk. There have been victims both in Manchester and internationally who are last seen behaving erratically, making strange sounds, movements, running, climbing fences, breaking into businesses, claiming people are after them. They're extremely paranoid, frightened, or frightening to other people. There is a drug in Colombia called scopolamine. It's a colourless, odourless and tasteless drug. It renders the victim into a submissive and highly suggestive state, and troublingly this drug completely blocks the mind's capacity for the formation of memories. As such, people are rendered amnesic as a result and cannot identify their perpetrators. It's called the zombie drug. And even under hypnosis, victims of date rape drugs can often recall events, but scopolamine doesn't allow the mind to record the memory and dissolves the capacity for willpower. This drug has a long dark history in Colombia that dates back to pre-Spanish conquests, where it was used by Indian tribes to render the wives of dead chiefs submissive so they would willingly allow themselves to be buried alive with their masters in the afterworld. Joseph Mengele experimented with scopolamine. It was also used as a childbirth drug in the early 20th century, while the pollen from the tree that produces scopolamine is said to conjure up strange dreams. I'm not saying this is what's happening, but if these people are being drugged by something that has never been seen before and therefore we can't test it or trace it, perhaps that would explain some of the mystery. It seems everyone has gone quiet regarding the now infamous alleged Manchester pusher, and in my search I was pretty unhappy with the vague and disjointed information predictably portrayed by the mainstream media, as well as the sugar-coated explanations given by authorities. After all, if they came out and said we've got a serial killer, or perhaps even a group, a coven or network of killers, Manchester City, especially the gay village, would die in the arse, no pun intended. Panic would spread and no one would go out. The city centre would effectively be a ghost town, and they wouldn't want that to hit the local economy. Also, it is possible that the police are playing a game of cat and mouse with a killer in the hopes of catching them in the act, and if so, they are playing with people's lives. There is something very sinister in the world today, something we thought only existed in movies or in nightmares. Regardless of whether it is a serial killer or killers, death by misadventure, accident or otherwise, we should continue to shine a spotlight on these occurrences, if for no other reason than to bring awareness to the dangers around the waterways, and that men are now just as vulnerable as women ever were. We should talk about these things in the hopes of minimising these problems, as preventative measures have either not been put in place or are clearly not working. And you're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International. Pet Shop Boys, West End Girls.
Sometimes you're better off dead. There's a gun in your hand, it's pointing at your head. You think you're mad, too unstable, kicking in chairs and knocking down tables in a restaurant in a West End town. Call the police, there's a madman around, running down underground to a dive bar in a West End town. In a West End town, a dead end world, with the East End boys and West End girls. In a West End town, a dead end world, with the East End boys and West End girls. West End girls. Too many shadows, whispering voices, faces on posters, too many choices. If, when, why, what, how much have you got? Have you got it to get? If so, how often? Which you choose, a hard or soft option? In a West End town, a dead end world, the East End boys and West End girls. In a West End town, a dead end world, the East End boys and West End girls. West End girls. West End In a West End town, a dead end world, the East End boys and West End girls. Ooh, West End town, a dead end world, East End boys, West End girls. West End
Our Pet Shop Boys, West End Girls. You're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International. Now, the next article that I have, next cab off the rank, apparently, if you were to ask a percentage of British school students, pupils, they would have you believe, or in fact they believe, that the Queen invented the telephone. A BBC article called Queen Invented Phone, pupil says 1 in 10 children think the Queen invented the telephone. A survey of children's science knowledge suggests. How very bizarre. Others gave credit for the invention to Charles Darwin and Noel Edmonds. A fifth of 1,000 primary and secondary pupils polled thought Star Wars character, this is a fifth, so this is 20%, let's be clear, 20% of primary and secondary students thought Star Wars character Luke Skywalker or Richard Branson was first on the moon. Oh dear. Some 60% of 9 and 10-year-olds thought Sir Isaac Newton discovered fire, the Survey for Science campaign Birmingham Science Council found. Despite these misconceptions, more children want to win a Nobel Prize for science than the X Factor. That's always a good sign. The survey of primary and secondary school children in the UK suggests there is some confusion about key scientific achievements. Just under a half of the boys, 49%, correctly pinned down gravity as Newton's groundbreaking discovery compared to 76% of girls. Just over a third of boys said Newton discovered fire, while the remaining 16% either said he invented the internet or discovered the solar system or America. 8 out of 10 boys correctly identified Alexander Graham Bell as the inventor of the telephone, compared with 69% of girls. There you go. Dr. Pam Waddle from Birmingham Science City said, while some of these findings will raise a smile, it suggests that school children aren't turned into our scientific heroes in the same way that they might be to sporting or music legends. She suggested it was clear that primary school children had a real interest in science. In fact, nearly 70% of 9 and 10-year-olds would like to be famous for winning a Nobel Prize in science, yet this drops to only 33% among 11 to 15-year-olds. It appears children are losing an interest in science at secondary school, so more needs to be done to excite teenagers about the subject and rekindle some of their early childhood aspirations, she added. The poll was carried out online with a panel of 1,000 UK children in early March by OnePoll. So at secondary school, kids 11 to 15 years old are not really interested in the things that they should be interested in. I've got a theory about that. When you reach your early high school years, I think the programming of our schooling system becomes heavily layered, and it's at that time that you notice kids start doing really weird things. They start drinking, they start smoking, and I remember this even when I was in school, and we went from being interested in, I don't know, climbing trees and riding our bikes, to suddenly everyone was drinking and smoking, and then kids started breaking off and having sex, and it all went from there. And it happened very rapidly between the age of about 13 and 14, and I really noticed it myself. Even back then I just thought, that's really weird. How does that happen? Why does that happen? It's not just about being antsy, it's not just about trying to break away and grow up in their own way. There's other things going on here. And you're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International. This is George McRae. Rock your baby. Baby. What a beautiful song. Again, another classic that I haven't heard in bloody donkey's years. Where have I been hiding all this time? You're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International. We're coming up to the hour shortly, so I'll go to the news in a minute and then stick around with me for another hour or so. I've got a bit more information coming up for you. I'm going to do a celebrity profile on the rather hot and sexy man, Paul Walker, who unfortunately left us a couple of years ago in a blazing car accident. Very strange circumstances, and something that I'm definitely interested in a lot of this movie stuff, and the people and the players, the symbolism in films, the power of films, the psychology of films, how it's affecting our world, and how it's leading us in a certain directions. And movies are very, very, very powerful. Before I go to the news, though, I've got a quote here for you. This one's by Joseph Campbell, who said, "We must let go of the life we have planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us." And this is an interesting subject because we tend to get given our lives. How many people actually design their own lives? Nobody really. We get given our lives, and we start from such an early age where we wind up going through school and then primary and then into secondary, and then, people who make a career sometimes out of education, and, it goes on into university and beyond and beyond and beyond. And it's interesting because despite all the educated people in the world is in a really bad shape. And I think the truth is really, really simple. I don't think we're being educated in the subjects and with the information that we should be educated with. And that explains an awful lot. And I think the human race at this time are on the verge of some massive, massive breakthroughs. And we are going into a time now, 2016, 2017 and 2018 are going to be massive deciders in the history of our planet, and you are seeing history in the making. And never underestimate the power of the time that you're living in. We're taught that our lives are pretty dull and that we have no real effect, and we're just basically mindless consumers, and we do a few minor things with our lives and then pop our clogs, and that's the end of that. But actually what we're experiencing now in the history of our planet is so fundamentally important that you are seeing world history in the making. So forget about that life that you got told to be. Forget about that person that you've been indoctrinated and conditioned to be. And also the guilt factor. The guilt factor of trying to be your authentic self and letting down the people who claim they love us by trying to be who we believe ourselves to be, and making all those mistakes along the way, and making all those blunders in front of our family and friends on our road to personal authenticity and discovering who we really are. Don't ever give up on that. And stumbling here and there, the knocks and blows in life, sometimes they round you out very nicely in the end, and you wind up being quite compassionate. In fact, in Japan, when a very expensive vase or a cup or a bowl or something that's a beautiful creation, if it breaks or they drop it and it smashes, they actually mend it with gold. So it's actually not only is it more valuable once it's broken, it's actually more beautiful after it's been broken. So there you go. There's a little tip from me. You're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International, heading up to the hour, and this is the international news.
In Washington, I'm Rebecca Foster. Police in Belgium have made multiple arrests in connection with Tuesday's terrorist attacks in Brussels. Multiple other suspects have also been detained in Germany and France. Officials have also revealed that the second suicide bomber involved in the airport attack was Najim Lahraoui. His DNA was also found at the scene of the Paris attacks in November. This comes as U.S. officials confirmed 2 Americans were killed in the Brussels bombings. The news came as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met with European leaders in Belgium. Kevin McAleese has more.
America's top diplomat offered his condolences for the victims of Tuesday's attack, promising the full support of the United States.
And we will continue to provide any assistance necessary in investigating these heinous acts of terrorism and bringing those responsible to justice.
At least 2 Americans were confirmed among the dozens killed when suicide bombers attacked an airport and metro station in the early morning.
The U.S. military says it has killed the Islamic State group's second-in-command leader in Syria. The U.S. Defense Department believes the senior terrorist, known as Haji Imam, was the finance minister for the self-proclaimed Islamic State. Our U.S. correspondent Laura Kantikin reports.
Speaking to reporters Friday morning, United States Defense Secretary Ash Carter said Haji Imam was believed to be the self-proclaimed Islamic State's finance minister. He held a senior rank in IS and was a longtime terrorist starting at Iraq's branch of al-Qaeda. Earlier this year, American forces struck cash storage units, burning the organization's monetary funds. Secretary Carter said military efforts are hampering the ability of IS to pay its fighters. This strategy is hurting the number of recruits as a result, according to the U.S. Defense Department.
A historic concert is taking place Friday night in Cuba as the Rolling Stones prepare to take the stage. Thought to have